Well, this is amazing, don't you think?
It is, yeah.
Well, we're here with Vitalik, and I think there's a bunch of questions that I have. I think Vitalik probably have some as well that we want to discuss. I think the merge has been something that people have been, as you said, working toward for 7 years, right? And so this is a huge event for the whole ecosystem. And yeah, let's dive into some interesting questions, at least from my side. I'm really curious how you see the kind of the evolution between the proof of stake, right, that I think a lot of people are waiting for, a lot of people want to transition, and the proof of work that has been there, has probably hundreds of millions of dollars of hardware investment, and kind of how do you see that evolution happening from perspective of miners and that ecosystem?
I guess. I mean, from the perspective of like the general ecosystem, like I think the merge is like it's obviously more important than an average hard fork, but like structurally in terms of what people have to do, it's I think it's important to remember that it's not too different from a hard fork, right? Because like you have your account and your contract and your application, and the merge happens, and what happens during the merge is basically like the proof of. In saying that the proof of work chain like stops is a bit of an oversimplification, because what actually happens is that the proof of work gets taken out, the proof of work chain keeps existing, it just like lives inside of the proof of stake chain after that, right? So from the point of view of like users and applications, like very little changes. Some like blocks start coming a little bit faster and more regularly, blocks get reverted much less frequently, but otherwise like it's just a transition like many other transitions. The big question, of course, that makes this different from like most other hard forks is that it does like basically tell miners you don't have a job anymore. And that, I mean, of course, this is something that's not going to surprise miners at all, right? Because we've been talking about proof of stake pretty much since the beginning. And I think a lot of like the Ethereum proof of work chain has even been running longer than a lot of miners have even been hoping. But at the same time, obviously, there's they still have hardware, and they would obviously love to see their hardware continuing to be used for longer. And so I guess like what could they do? Like one option is, of course, to try to like disrupt the merge somehow, but that seems unrealistic at this point. The other option is to try to kind of make some coordinated effort to support like some proof of work chain so that it could have more value and they could continue to mine it. And the natural choices that you have if you're an ETH miner is either Ethereum Classic or make a new one. And we've been seeing a couple of potential efforts to make a new one, but like it's to me like it's not clear what value that chain would have to users, right? Because like with Ethereum with Ethereum Classic, there's at least like a clear ideological pitch that you believe really strongly in the immutability vision and in kind of being even slower and more conservative in development than Ethereum is, and all of those things, and those are things that users can value. But here, it's like, okay, you're on a proof of work chain, and otherwise like it's not clear what happens, and like how is this thing better than Ethereum Classic? So we'll see if like that effort actually takes off, and if it does, whether they'll actually be able to make that case, but we'll see.
Well, I think a few folks I know would expect that kind of people would just push the difficulty bomb and leave the ETH1 pretty much running as it is. And the value there, interestingly, is in the fork itself. Because at the moment of the merge, you will have then two networks, right, which have kind of a mirrored copy of the state. And the kind of question there is, Then you have exchanges, you have Oracle providers, you have stablecoin providers that kind of are deciding in a way, right, which one they respect. Because like at that point, you'll have, you know, whatever, 100 billion of USDT on one chain and 100 billion of USDT on the other chain, kind of cryptographically. And so they need to stop respecting one of them, which actually creates an interesting questions for the, like a number of different angles, like legally, you know, and.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think they're like I haven't seen any like indication that any of the that any of the major providers are going to like do anything other than consider the the post-merge Ethereum to be Ethereum. But I think I mean in the further future that definitely becomes more of a concern. Like basically the fact that you know USDC's decision of kind of which chain to consider Ethereum is a like it could become a significant decider in future contentious hard forks. Yeah, I mean, well, I guess the like one question to ask there is like, you know, in what future circumstances might they do that? And you know, in the future, going forward, like 5 or 10 years from now, I mean, obviously, yeah, you know, there is a chance that you know there will be more contentious hard forks in the future. I mean, there's even a chance that Bitcoin will have a contentious hard forks in the future, and the and at that point, like, you know, maybe the Ethereum Foundation will be weaker. Maybe the ETH2 client teams will have more power. Maybe like someone like Coinbase would both run a stable coin and have bought up one of their client teams by then. Like, you know, like lots of those kinds of things could happen. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know what will happen. I mean, there's the question of like, if that happen, if that happens, is that good or bad? And if it like, if it's bad, then like how could you conceivably stop it? And like the best answer I can come up with is to just like encourage the adoption of more kinds of stable coins, I guess. And like basically, you know, like people could use USDC, but then you know you could use DAI. And like at this point, I mean, like DAI has taken this kind of very decisive route of saying, you know, we're not going to be purely crypto economic. We're going to be a wrapper for a whole bunch of real world assets. But like DAI could easily be a wrapper for, you know, instead of just USDC, like 10 different kinds of US dollar backed stablecoins. And my impression is that's what they want to do in the long term anyway, but you know, we'll see.
Yeah, well, I saw them expanding in the real world, which is probably a way to grow supply faster.
Yeah, I mean, like to me, it's like it's an okay thing to do. Like I mean, I want there to exist purely crypto economic stablecoins, which is why I've been a big fan of RAI recently. But like the real world asset niche, I do think it's a totally okay niche, and someone needs to take it. Like I just want you know, DAI to move faster and kind of adding collateral that's not just USDC. No, I hope they do.
So I guess like shifting gears from perspective of, you know, let's say other layer ones and like and Ethereum. There's, I mean, like I mentioned this. There's a meme of Ethereum killers, which I really hate because it's constantly coming up from, especially media. But like, I mean, to be clear, we're not nobody's in a killing business here. We're all in a building business. And so like the whole point here is to, you know, build like different approaches. So I'm curious from your perspective, how do you see kind of other layer ones, right? Especially, I mean, given you mentioned like you want to probably stabilize layer one, right? And allow more experimentation in layer two. How do you see other layer ones taking potentially different approach, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think like first of all, like there are some layer ones that actually are like at least attempted Ethereum killers, right? Like you know, last year you did have Duke One say that like very infamous phrase, "By my hands, DAI will die," and then of course he ended up dying first. But that's. So and then you know there are also like actually layer ones that kind of say the kind of, you know, very friendly, we're a sister chain in private in public thing, but then you know, in private they raise $100 million VC rounds off of you know, hey guys, Ethereum is crap and we'll replace them. So like that does exist, but I think there's also plenty of other projects that like actually are very friendly, actually do want to coexist, and actually do, And I think there is a lot of room for that to happen. Like I think there's obviously different trade-offs in design space that can be made, right? Like you can choose. Are you going to be a more decentralized chain, or are you going to be a fast chain? Are you going to focus on like trying to support every application, or you're going to focus on being really good for a particular kind of applications. So like one random example might be like, gaming, right? So in gaming, you really care about latency, right? And it's like, you really care about latency. It's not even about like, you can't even go and say like, okay, we'll be fine if we can do it in like 1 second, because that's what Tendermint does. It's like, you need like 100 and 200 milliseconds. And, like I remember when playing World of Warcraft 20 years ago, if latency goes above 600 milliseconds, like that would show you a red bar. Like 600 milliseconds is terrible. And here we are with blockchains where even the fast chains advertise themselves as 2 seconds, right? So like if you want to make a real-time gaming chain, then you have to go really hard in the pushing latency down direction, but like that is going to make you worse in other ways, right? So like one very specific example is if you want to be very low latency and like also be reasonably decentralized at the same time, you might have to like shard geographically. You might have to say, this is the America shard, this is the Europe shard, this is the East Asia shard, and here's one for Africa, and here's one for the Middle East, and here's one for Hawaii, right? Like, you might actually have to do something like that, but that's not something that, say, a global payment network would want, right? So and then another example might be like, what programming languages you want to support. Like, do you want to you can make different trade-offs at even at a community level. So I do think that there are lots of different approaches, and even like Ilya talked about some of these in the presentation, and the whole kind of modularity versus like integrated layer one thing. I think there's lots of strategies that you can talk about and that you can try to do. And so I'm happy that we have this kind of very diverse layer one ecosystem that can try all of them out.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I mean, it's always been on one side, like we've obviously learned a lot and kind of started from Ethereum in many ways, and to extent, like we have definitely used the point that like we will deliver something better than Ethereum on this set of criteria, right?
Right.
At the same time, I think the goal always been like, how do we build something that everybody can use, and kind of how do we integrate more? And I think like remote accounts and bridging, etc., is part of that story as well. I think for me the question is, right now we're in this kind of Cambrian explosion phase. Everybody's experimenting. We have a lot of ideas. We have a lot of things that will fail, sadly. But at the same time, it's some of these things will stabilize. Like we cannot have kind of continuously changing how consensus is going to be done, how runtime is going to be done over next. I mean, maybe we can over the next 100 years, but like my expectation is there will be some stabilization. Do you think at that point there will be more merges?
Yeah, no, the chain merge thing has always fascinated me, right? Like the question of, if there are projects that are pushing like either similar or even just like very compatible visions, then like I remember even thinking about this years ago, that like it might make sense for a couple of projects to try to merge. I think I even I even recommended the idea to a couple of projects on top of Ethereum, but I think it ended up not happening because the logistics are hard. Like you have to convince both communities to be willing to merge, and then you have to figure out this kind of question of like, if you do the merger, at what points token price do you take? And it just gets into this sort of like really deep minefield. Like, and to be clear, like I really hope that like we can eventually actually like put in the effort and figure out how to make merges happen, because I do think that they can be really valuable for a lot of different communities. But it's I guess it's a hard problem, and it is something that I think would be really worthwhile to see eventually.
Yeah, I think that it's a combination of like technical and operational complexity, and then like somewhat tribalism of the ecosystems, where in some way, like to do a merge, both need to give. And
yeah,
so,
that's true. Well, I think I mean, it depends on if it's like a horizontal or a vertical merge, right? So like one example is like horizontal would be if, say, Scroll and Polygon decide to merge, and vertical would be if, let's say, like Gnosis and Status decide to merge, right? Like two different ecosystems that do different things and they're complementary. I mean, I guess they're both interesting. I mean, I've generally been thinking about merges more from that kind of vertical perspective, but I guess we'll see what ends up happening first.
I mean, I think horizontal makes sense because at some point everybody will arrive to some like some set of decisions, right? Which like at least my expectation is there will be less good set of decisions than number of projects right now.
Right.
And
that sounds true. Yeah. One actually thing I wanted to ask you was, I know I was watching the presentation and kind of Nier's approach of like not doing modularity as much and basically having this sort of more integrated chain is it made me wonder like what are the actual differences between like say like Nier's relationship with Aurora or with forgot the name, the enterprise one that starts with a C, and like if the Ethereum's base layer's relationship with like Optimism and Arbitrum, for example.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So the way to think about it, that Nier actually each contract is a rollup. Right. And we just bundle them kind of into the shards and just provide all the infrastructure underneath and data availability and challenges, etc. And so what something like Aurora is, it kind of from a perspective of developer is just a smart contract, right? They just like literally wrote some Rust and just shipped it to the chain. From perspective of kind of end to end, right? It is kind of its own rollup that just you just uses all of the infrastructure. They don't need to have their own sequencers. They don't need to have their own.
Right. What was the name of that enterprise one?
Calimero.
Calimero, right?
Yeah.
So like one example would be like if I'm a user of Aurora, then I would not be able to like seamlessly send coins to someone in Calimero, right?
So that is in works.
Okay.
Yeah. So right now, because Aurora is EVM, what needs to happen is we need to extend EVM to support async communication.
I see.
And so that's right now, and like there's complexity around that because kind of how do you like that we've solved on near native runtime, right? We have promises with callbacks, but we need to build kind of that in EVM. And I think Alex Shevchenko, who is also here in Korea, they're working on that, figuring out how to like make that also secure as well.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, okay, so basically like I guess in the Nier case, the Nier base is still like, it's providing like some kind of like VM that all of these other things run in, and so it's like doing execution and not just data.
Yeah, it does execution through WebAssembly.
Right, yeah, I guess like in Ethereum circles, like some people have suggested the idea that like eventually Ethereum should have execution shards, and that becomes like from a complexity perspective a much more viable thing to do, especially once you can like ZK snark things, right? And well, the ZK snark thing is powerful because basically you end up being able to support like a sort of more enshrined L2 with like pretty much any rules as long as you can expose them in like a verification key, and a verification key is like 5 elliptic curve points. And it's like one polynomial equation to check no matter what the actual rules are, which is kind of interesting. So again, like one of the things that I sometimes wonder is like 10 to 20 years from now, like how different are these things going to end up being?
Yeah, well, so I do think zero knowledge will definitely play a huge role. I think at least at the current stage and foreseeable stage, the latency of zero knowledge will always be slower than just executing, right? So you still somewhere need to execute normally and get result to the user. And so I think from my perspective, what we want from a zero knowledge is a proof that is lasting, that everybody can verify cheaply,
Right.
especially on the light clients. And that's what I meant by compression. Like for me, this is more about compression than about kind of a faster runtime, because just the simple runtime, just running the code, you still need to do that.
Right. Well, I mean, you could take the PBS route, right, where you kind of like specialize the role of kind of creating blocks, and then everyone else like just verifies proofs right from the beginning.
Yes, that's still latency, right?
Right. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So I think that's a trade-off. Like, how do we, if we're trying to optimize for like what's the fastest latency we can achieve, and then kind of proofs coming in later. I think that's like for me,
Right.
and this is kind of how we design even our consensus is always pipelining. It's like do everything as fast as possible, and then catch up with all the like approvals and verification, data availability. So I think like there's another topic which maybe shifting completely gears from the merge is AI.
Okay, yeah, it's fine.
I think I saw some of your tweets. Obviously, I've been kind of thinking a lot about this. The kind of current situation is that we have a very fast evolving private companies that are kind of building a very powerful capabilities, right? And I think OpenAI has been showing some of the work they're doing, but not actually opening it up. And we have obviously Google, we have a few other facilities that have kind of access to compute and talent that need. At the same time, you have lots of talent sitting on sidelines, like in universities, because they actually don't have access to the compute and data they need to do this. So I think the question that I keep thinking about is, how do we kind of leverage what we're building here, right, with Web3, to actually make it community governed, give the resources that these researchers and universities need to have access, and at the same time kind of the outcome of this be available to the kind of community as a whole?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I guess the way that I think about the AI space and like AI safety problems in general is like what are going to be the dominant factors that will make like the best AIs better than either like medium AIs or the best AIs of like 1 or 2 years before. And like the possibilities are basically like one is better algorithms, so better kinds of neural networks and convolutions and whatever fancy math. The other is better just more compute, and the third is more data. And like there has been this kind of, I think, big kind of shift over the last 5 years where a lot of people just think that like if you just add more compute and more data, that might be like enough to get all the way to like AIs being smarter than humans. And I'm not sure how much I believe this. Like on the one hand, like I get their arguments, but on the other hand, I have this sort of strong intuitive sense that like there's categorical things that GPT-3 and DALL-E aren't doing. So I don't know. But if we are in the world where just like compute and if we're in the world where compute is the bottleneck, right, then like the question to ask is like why should we even believe at all that sort of blockchain style decentralized things have any shot at all at being competitive? And if it's compute, then the answer is pretty simple, which is that like decentralized like crypto-economic stuff is actually incredibly good at brute force computation because we have mining, and we just like basically all we would have to do is like create a new form of mining, and would have like millions of computers around the world basically being this like huge collective AI. If it's data, then you could imagine like some kind of like if we can invent some form of decentralized training that's like reasonably privacy preserving on the data, and potentially even find ways to like compensate people for like contributing their own data, then like you could create something there. And then like obviously if like what actually matters is algorithms, then like I do think that's harder to decentralize, because eventually it is going to come down to just like needing, one guy to eventually come up with the right idea, and then it's a matter of like whether or not that idea gets kept secret and who deploys it. Though so far the ideas haven't been that secret yet, which is I guess a good sign. So yeah, and to the extent that it's based on like compute and data, I can definitely see how you could create some kind of like big AI that's decentralized in some blockchain way, and I could definitely see the like the benefits of doing it that way, right? That basically you do have this thing which is which actually ends up being controlled by some collective network where the control is done transparently instead of having it just be a thing that lives inside of a data center somewhere.
I mean, I think from what we've seen, like for context, I worked on some of the models that are right now scaled up to be like at the basis of GPT-3 and others, and like the reality is it's kind of the same pattern replicated and scaled up, and even the data is not, I would say data is not as bottleneck, although like a smart data is better, obviously.
Yeah.
I think the question that I keep pondering though is governance of this, because the reality is like, let's say we build this kind of, incentivized system that, amasses millions of computers that are training, this gigantic model. And like, we don't even need to, like, I actually don't like believe we're gonna achieve like a full, like general sentient intelligence, in like coming years. But what we will achieve is actually building better instruments that are indeed better in many ways than humans can be, right? And like this is coming from, for example, Google being a more knowledgeable, than any single person can be, right? And so we can build systems that are like that already, that are now more, maybe not creative, but they're better at synthesis, they're better at finding information, and they're better at kind of putting things together already with the algorithms we have. And so I think for me then the question is like, how do you govern the system? Because as, do you give access to everyone? And then, what are kind of bad things this can lead to? Do you give access to, researchers that, can modify and kind of extend it?
Right. Well, that's one part of the question, and then the other part of the question is like, what do you train it on, right? Because like, if you write a storytelling AI and you train it on like books, that'll give a very different result from like if you train it on 4chan. And then if you train it on books, like is it just books in English? Do you add books in Chinese? Do you add books in Korean? Like with what frequencies? So there's like interesting governance questions, I think, in like what the training data is too. Like especially since like from what we've seen of AI so far, like they're definitely good at kind of just mimicking the sort of the general vibe of like the data that's been fed into them. So yeah, I guess so that's aside from like when does the thing get released to whom? Like that's probably the other big lever. And then the question is like, what kind of governance would actually get built? Like, like who would have the right to participate? What would the mechanism be? And all of those questions. So, like, what has your thought been on that so far?
I think we do need, this is why like part of for NEAR as well, we're trying to figure out what is more kind of still decentralized checks and balances system, but which has some kind of executive function, which has some kind of strategy decision making at some point, right? That is accountable to the community, is able can be vetoed and can be potentially fired, but is kind of driving some strategy, because I think at the end it's still people. Like I kind of, one of the things that we do sometimes, like with some of the folks I work with, is we ban some words as a way to actually get clarity. So at some point we ban zero knowledge. because it was too easy to say, oh, is this going to be solved with zero knowledge without actually getting clarity on what that means. And so I think this is like right now it's worth banning word community because it's really easy to say, oh, community will do it or community governance, etc., without actually explaining what that actually means, right? And I think like getting a clarity, like who are the people behind what is the drivers and how they're making decisions is really important in this case, especially. I think you want kind of different levels of participation, right? You want, experts and kind of on one side who are able to come together and make decisions, who can review potentially even the results of this model in different ways. And you can have kind of a broader set of people who are, participating in this because they're like economically aligned. And then you have somebody who is, knowledgeable and kind of full-time working on governing this and deciding, like even you mentioned some of these data questions and potentially like use case questions, like where should this be applied? Like should it be trading on FTX or should it be, writing Wikipedia? Should it be, because like you can actually apply the same model for any of those use cases and like you at some point need to make these decisions as well. So I think like that kind of model, and we're trying to like figure this out as kind of a pattern in general for DAOs.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely agree. Those are all hard questions. Like, I think there's no such thing as like the aggregate of a community's opinion. It all depends on kind of what the mechanism is, right? It's like, on the one hand, like if you go ask people what they think of Mark Zuckerberg, a lot of people will say they hate him. But then if you look at people's kind of actions in the market, they use the platform and they contribute to him having $100 billion. So yeah, I mean, it's all about like what is the mechanism that you're using to aggregate, and like there are mechanisms that are better and mechanisms that are worse, and like this question of like what's to build is I mean. I guess I'm hoping that the crypto space can kind of help us quickly go through a lot of different designs and just kind of very quickly give all of us a better idea of like what works reasonably well and what breaks very quickly. So
yeah, I think like for me, so we built Astra DAO I think a year and a half ago, like the first version, and that's test bed for a lot of the kind of DAO community governance. Like we've seen if this is just like equal group that bigger than 15 people, that it starts to like trail off and people stop participating. You need some kind of hierarchy, you need some kind of engagement.
Yeah, no, I think this is the thing I've like heard from DAO people, is that there's like the bad kind of the bad kind of decentralization is like when you create something that's actually basically centralized, except instead of the center being one guy, the center is like 100,000 people voting on everything. The good kind of decentralized is where like you actually have like different groups and you give them more independence than like a regular corporation would, and you like actually take advantage of like differences in people's focuses and their creativity. But like we still have a lot to learn there.
Yeah, I mean, this is actually our approach to hubs, and because
hubs seem like a brilliant idea.
Anything else we should cover?
What else should we cover?
Yeah. Any questions? All right. Seems like we covered everything.
Yeah,
we solved everything.
Solved everything. Yeah, we've had a good panel. Oh, one question. Okay. Sure.
Hello, my name is Grida, and first of all, I really want to thank you, Terika, to invite me here. Actually, I'm really far from the engineering thing because I'm NFT artist and also NFT creator. And I'm so sorry, it's not about the merge. It's a little bit different subject, but I'm more for into our soulbound token, and you guys talked about the DAO before, and I'm so moved by this your thesis. I even printed for your signature, but anyway. So just wanted to know about the opinions about soulbound token. I think, as I understood, merge could be also based on the population of soulbound token for me. So just wanted to hear opinions for that. Yeah, thank you so much for listening. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like the problem that soulbound tokens are trying to solve in general, right, is this problem that if like we're building, you know, governance and community infrastructure and all of these things on top of like on top of tokens where they can always just very easily be transferred, then like you're very limited in what you can do because like every token doesn't actually like show much about yourself. It basically just shows you, you know, like how much money you have, right? It's like there's like you can't tell the difference between like say someone who climbed Mount Everest versus someone who just like, you know, found someone else who climbed Mount Everest and gave them $50 for the NFT. And like I think there's a lot of like specific there's a lot of like important use cases around this. Like one of them is around governance, right? Like if you're going to try to create a governance system, then you might want to create a governance system where the people who govern like are the people, or who have more power in governance are the people who like actually have a closer connection to that community. Or, you know, you want the governance to like stay distributed and not just like get bought up by one person who has a lot of money. You know, if you want to do like token airdrops for a new project, for example, then, you know, you instead of just giving them tokens to everyone, you might want to like focus tokens to people who actually participated in some community. And so the underlying goal is to just have like some ecosystem where you can have like make these kind of claims around like this person participated in this event, this person like claims that this other person knows some skill, that this person is a unique human, like claims about reputation and these kinds of things. And so the idea behind soulbound tokens was to try to like create an ecosystem around those kinds of things and to like basically create more possibilities in terms of you know, like what kinds of governance you can have, and also what kinds of like just applications in general we can build.
But like to challenge this, the like attaching this achievements to a private key, right?
Right.
Is a highly kind of insecure way, because I mean we've seen private keys.
I mean, I agree with this, and like this is so that's I think part of why the soulbound tokens like paper talked a lot about community recovery. Like base, you know.
But I'm just saying, but the alternative is like, you know, you have multi-sig, or you have what Near has like with multiple keys. The problem is then you can just sell your account.
Right. So, well, the idea behind community recovery is basically like even if you sell your account, so like, you know, you could still recover it, so you can't actually sell it.
Yeah. So, but I think like that means just like you're actually kind of detaching this from your on-chain activity, right, to some kind of community level. And I think that. Like at the end, that's kind of more where the social comes in. I think like at the end, it will be your social identity that you cannot really sell. Like it will be really weird if you just sell your Facebook account.
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, there are people who like there's people who sell their Uber accounts, and like that I saw there like that's actually a safety problem in Africa in some places. But yeah, again, like that is one path, right, to kind of like link it to something that's too difficult to sell, and then like add some like cryptography on top to make it also preserve privacy. But I mean, like I agree that there's like a lot of things that are incompatible with each other, but you know, at the same time, like I also see this sort of really big problem that coin voting governance just like leads to all kinds of problems, and we do need something better. So, and like I do think that, you know, we have a long time to experiment, and so like, I want to see more of these things just get tried, and we can like see, you know, where the problems actually are.
Yeah, for sure. No, I mean that's what I mentioned. I think that at the end you want people that are actually like explicitly people, and so there's many ways to surface that. I think that I'm actually excited about all of the movement to earn type of things, because they are literally, their business is to make sure that the person is unique. Yeah. And so they're actually probably one of the best civil resistance, like mass civil resistance tools that are right now out there already running. That if if you have an account with them, I mean, obviously you can still sell it, but at least it's it's a good enough start that if you're trying to do airdrops or kind of, you know, sounds of voting, that's probably a good base.
Yeah. last question. We'll answer it in 35 seconds.
Hi, I'm Alexis. Thank you so much for such an interesting talk from both of you. I had two very short questions. One was around account abstraction. It's a very interesting and exciting movement, at least for me. I'm curious from your perspective, what are all the conditions that need to be met in order for it to be adopted and then also reach kind of a widespread adoption across the ecosystem? And the second question is around the world between L1 and L2s that you've described. In your mind, on the Ethereum ecosystem, what is the ideal form of a bridge that will allow for asset transfers and also data transfers that allows for like a seamless kind of expansion into L2?
Yeah, I guess like just in the interest of time, I'll focus on the first one. Account abstraction. So the big so in Ethereum, so like I know like Near is taking this sort of more enshrined approach, right, where you have some like explicit protocol feature for recovery, but so in the Ethereum context, you have the effort that's the furthest along in account abstraction is ERC 4337, right, which is like this sort of second layer mechanism where you can have a smart contract be your wallet, and the smart contract can have rules that like verify transactions, like verify signatures, and that allows you to like change what the keys are, add multisigs, and like add all of these features on top. In terms of like what it takes for it to get adopted, so right now it's in test nets, but what it doesn't have yet, like one, there isn't like a good ERC 4337 wallet yet that needs to get built. Two is the team's current like strategy for adoption is to start with layer 2s. Because ERC 4337 has this killer feature, which is signature aggregation. This is something that layer 1 cannot do, right? Like, but in account abstraction, the signature aggregation feature lets you have like a BLS signature for like every account, and then you just add up all the BLS signatures into one, and only one signature goes on chain, and that gets verified against like all of the transactions, right? And this allows you to basically instead of having 65 bytes per account per transaction for a signature, like basically just have like 165 bytes for an entire block, which will make data in rollups much cheaper, right? Like the ERC 4337, depending on like what other forms of compression are added, like you could make transactions in rollups like somewhere between 1.3 and like 3 or 4 times cheaper. Actually, I had a diagram of this up on Twitter. It's like literally my most recent tweet from this morning. So actually finishing that and then getting it adopted on layer 2s, then doing security audits, and then hopefully it sort of starts getting a network effect and it becomes more of a default over time.
Yeah, that in general, more wallet support, like more of the features that account abstractions allow, because they allow a lot, and we need wallet support to actually surface that, like kind of across all of the ecosystems. All right, well, it was great, and thank you, everyone.
Yep. Thank you.